Hello and welcome to this special DrumCast in partnership with Adobe Stock. The creative industries help to define the look of an era. As much as architecture and literature have an enormous impact, the style and flavour of a decade is primarily decided by the creatives. And while that's a privilege, it's also a responsibility. It means creatives must be the ones to constantly push themselves forward. Too often brands find themselves playing catch-up with trends being created by individuals and younger audiences, instead of working with them collaboratively. That risks alienating those savvy millennial and Generation Z consumers who recognise when they're being sold to rather than worked with. And in order for marketers and creatives to stay abreast of visual trends, the Drum, in conversation with Adobe Stock and Dentsu, will draw from Adobe's 2020 Creative Trends Report and explore in some detail some of the most important visual trends and sub-trends for the year. At the end, if you have any questions, please do feel free to email drumstudios@thedrum.com. So I'm joined by Sabrina Rodriguez, who is the Global Head of Digital Marketing at Dentsu.
Hi everybody.
By James Thomas, award-winning creative himself and Global Head of Creative Technology at Dentsu.
Hello, everybody.
And finally, Richard West, who is EMEA Manager for Strategic Development Team at Adobe.
Hey, Chris. Hiya.
So thanks very much for joining us. Richard, Adobe have released their 2020 Creative Trends Report, and there's so much to unpack there. I don't know that we'll even have time to scratch the surface at this time. But what's the thought process that actually goes into creating this?
So basically what we're doing every year is looking at visual trends. So that's what we've done in the past 4 years or so. But this year we decided actually we've got the opportunity to look at more than just visual, i.e. capture. So it's not just a case of, all right, what do people see or look for photographs or for video? It's a question of, okay, let's have a look at the other pieces that we can play to here, because obviously Adobe is in multiple different parts of the creative industry. You know, we produce software that is for illustration, for instance, for 3D design. So therefore we've said, okay, well, we can have a look outside of just what people are capturing. We can look at that definitely. So we've got visual trends here that effectively are, you know, this year's indicators of where we're seeing the visual part of the industry going, basically. But we're also looking at the joys of design trends. So this is picking up on that extension of what we're doing with images and saying, okay, well, actually, you know, we've got other things that we're creating here as far as illustration is concerned. So Illustrator, our software there for that, obviously very well known, basically. And you can see here, we'll talk about these no doubt later on, but it gives you a different feel from just stills or just video images, basically, video capture. But then, of course, video in itself is one of those trends this year we decided to actually call out specifically, so with our motion trends. So 3 different types of trends there to try and extend out what we're doing. And of course, part of the reason for this is we've got a lot of input coming in. So we've got a lot of information coming in from different sources. So we have lovely things like Behance, where people are surfacing their content, and therefore that gives us an indicator of, you know, how creatives are looking at different things and saying, okay, that's of interest, you know, and that's where they're seeing, you know, the reason why they should be doing this is because they get the feel that this is something that's going to work, going to resonate in the industry. And we also have the joys at Adobe of, as mentioned, all those nice softwares for design, for video, et cetera, so therefore, okay, we might as well use that. We can see how that's being used in a lot of cases. And then a part of the business that perhaps creatives aren't so aware of is what we do on our Experience Cloud side of the business. And it's a massive part of the business, another 30 or so applications that Adobe create. And with that, included in that, is analytics, for instance. So we have these really powerful analytics engines that essentially are saying, okay, well, you know, we can see what's going into a marketing campaign, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, that's where we can build up this really good pattern of not just what people are selling as contributors for photos or video, but the whole spectrum of how it's used, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives a real good feel for that part of the industry. And of course, this is all to do with making sure that we can surface what's popular, what's on vogue to the creative industry, so that they can use that, so they can inform their campaigns with that. And then from that, basically, it builds this range of, in this instance, 12 different types of trend this year. And the key thing there is we have some great technology. I mean, for instance, we have this Sensei-based search engine, which is our artificial intelligence, our machine learning, if you like, that you can use when you're on Adobe Stock to go and search for stuff, and it will help you find stuff, which is great. But it's kind of nice to know all right, where do I start from? I can't just basically go type in something and say, give me something relevant. Therefore, the trends here are trying to give you that input of, right, okay, if you're looking at a 3D type of environment, if you're wanting to do a mock-up with, that sort of elements in there, then basically, great, I can actually go and I can search for that content based on the trends. So, it's really trying to basically give you that starting point.
That's a huge amount of data there and some amazing tech underpinning it. So you have a new set of visual trends out this year. I wondered if you could maybe give us the top level of those, almost
Sure.
a surface level look at what people are using.
Yeah, well, you briefly saw this beforehand, basically, but these are the 4 visual trends that we've got this year. And it's very much, as I say, taken from the analytics that we have out there and the feel that we have across every creative on the planet, basically, as to what's going to be used, what's required, what are we seeing surfaced as far as types of campaign are concerned. Now, one of those key ones that we're seeing now evolving is the use of not just stereotypical 18 to 35-year-olds in advertising campaigns, in marketing campaigns, basically. So, the first one of our trends here for visuals is around that whole, okay, let's sort of advance the spectrum of the age there. We've also got a trend around here with express yourself. Now, this is very much a trend which is covering the joys of getting real emotions into imagery and therefore capturing that. So getting away from that sort of stock photography focused, cheesy smiles all the time scenario, basically, and getting into something that actually has, real sort of a feeling of emotion there, be it, fatigue or anger or sadness, sorrow, so going across the whole spectrum again, basically. And then, of course, with something we're seeing, I'm sure Sabrina might comment about this later on, but not just in campaigns, but basically across the world, you're seeing more of a use of makeup, not just as that sort of accentuator to make sure that the bags under your eyes from the weekend aren't showing, in my case, but basically giving you that artistic element. This is something that, okay, it is being used as an art form nowadays. So these are 3 very powerful trends we're seeing that the analysis is showing us that are definitely, coming up. And the 4th one there is this from me to we trend. Now, a bit of an odd name, but I think this picture really sort of exemplifies it. The way that the focus of the image is really drawing down due to the depth of field just to that one person in the centre. So, that person's obviously the focus, the fulcrum of this particular piece of artwork. But then it's showing that it's part of this broader campaign in this case, or some sort of activity that is the we part, and then taking it from that me part in the centre of it, basically that individual in the centre. So there's the 4 visual trends we're sort of saying and predicting this year are going to be very much in vogue. The analysis is there. Well, we'll see in a second from Sabrina, whether she thinks she's seeing that, or what's the sort of the grassroots view of this from people who are actually using it on a day-to-day basis. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, there you go, Chris. Hopefully that's given you a bit of information around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Though I do have to say I would miss the cheesy smiles if they went away entirely. So Sabrina, of those visual trends, are there any that you're seeing as sort of occupying more of the mind share of the market?
I mean, they're all very interesting, and I think all 4 of them are very much grounded in current trends that we're seeing in marketing and advertising. I think all ages welcome is definitely being more embraced, I think, particularly in the beauty and fashion industry. So we have the likes of Aussie and Pantene, very inclusive casting in their models without actually having to refer to it. It's not like a big deal anymore, which I think is really interesting in terms of their inclusive advertising. I think Helen Mirren being the face of L'Oreal, I think is very kind of symptomatic of this era of inclusive marketing. I think there are a few factors driving it. Obviously, we're an older population now, but I think there's also the fact that some of the big celebrities we grew up with in the 90s are now in their middle ages, but still very much in the spotlight. So Jennifer Aniston was 51 the other day, had her 51st birthday, has just been nominated for 2 Golden Globes. We've got Gwyneth Paltrow making headlines with Goop Lab. We've got Jennifer Lopez in Hustlers. These are women in their 50s redefining what it is to be powerful, independent, attractive and glamorous. And then you've also got the Jermaine Greer generation, the Instagrannies, who I think in the kind of context of Instagram, particularly and Pinterest, are very much shifting the perception of age. And again, like women like Iris Apfel and Mae Musk are just these incredible women who are, again, redefining what it is to be independent and powerful and fashionable. I would say the other two that I would pull out, I think there's a nice contrast and a slight paradox, actually, between the makeup is not a mask and from me to we. Makeup is not a mask is all about celebrating individuality. It's now considered completely fashionable to celebrate your individuality and use makeup not necessarily to accentuate beauty, but define who you are and how you're different. So the likes of FKA Twigs, Billie Eilish, Dua Lipa, very much embracing that makeup as a tool to define their personal brand. And I think the personalisation of makeup is interesting as well. So Rihanna's Fenty Beauty, for example, very much celebrating the spectrum of inclusivity when it comes to makeup as well. So that sort of celebrating individuality contrasts a lot with the sort of from me to we, which is all about the era of participation, the era of community. And I think community is sort of driven by this grassroots sort of digital detox, almost back to the roots momentum. You know, we've got a lot of activism as well around climate change, gender equality, LGBTQ. So I think brands are definitely embracing that. And I'd say at Dentsu, for example, we talk a lot about how we're greater than the sum of our parts. So I think that's probably the biggest trend we're seeing. But I think brands do need to be careful when playing in that space. I think we've learned a lot of lessons from the likes of Pepsi, for example, that tried to embrace that and unfortunately to their detriment. But I think it is a very interesting trend that's definitely going to increase.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And like you said, that interplay between kind of wider society and how brands are trying to appeal to them and communicate with them is something that is absolutely fascinating, really. James, those various trends and how they're implemented help you develop brand guidelines. So when you're talking to, I suppose from a technical aspect, how are you using the technology available to help you develop brand guidelines?
Well, I mean, at Dentsu, our approach for creative workflows is cloud first. So we have thousands of users across the world in different markets and regions, all collaborating on shared projects with clients, etc. So technology is an enabler for people to be working together in an agile way. It's really key for us. And a good example of how we've implemented that kind of workflow is actually working with Sabrina's team on our own brand guidelines for Dentsu Aegis Network. So that was managing that was a challenge, as you can imagine. 50,000 people trying to make sure they're all using the same logos, the right colour swatches, all the right elements of our identity was very challenging. Assets used to be stored on intranets, local file servers, on people's hard drives, and a typical situation, they're not updated. People often using the wrong assets. So what we did actually, we built the Dentsu Aegis Network Brand Hub, where we placed in all of our logos, colour swatches, stock imagery, all of our approved images that fit our look and feel for our own guidelines. And that was then owned by a brand guardian who is responsible for maintaining that library. They update all the assets, or if there is a change to the logo, they will implement that. And obviously that's dynamically pushed out to all of our users globally. So consistency is really good. That was shared to thousands of users. I think we've had, in the first 6 months, we had 40,000 interactions. We had 5,000 unique users, and that represents about 10% of our business. And the outcome of that was we saw around an 84% increase in faster workflows. So things like finding the assets quicker, sharing the assets, onboarding people onto our brand. Also, we saw a reduction in reworking, again replacing incorrect assets, and just in general an improvement in brand compliance, which has been really good. We are now, obviously, we've proved that out as our own method of working, and this is now how we approach client brand guidelines. So we help them build that into a library. We can share it internally with ourselves, also with our clients, because everyone has challenges managing their own brand guidelines. So the cloud-based technology, the tools that Adobe provide, that real enabler for us.
Yeah, certainly, and that's something that I know that a lot of the drum audience. They're looking for, to streamline their workflow. And it sounds like that's exactly what they need to be doing more of.
Yeah, and things like Creative Cloud Libraries, actually it's very simple. It's very simple to set up, it's very simple to manage. It's really not difficult, it's just a case of raising people's awareness. Creatives are used to working in the way they've always been working, and it's just having the awareness, and all the adoption from our user base was incredibly fast, incredibly high engagement, but it was just getting the message out, the awareness that there's a better way to work. It doesn't actually cost us anything because it's part of Creative Cloud. So yeah, it was just opening people's minds to new ways of working.
Yeah, certainly.
And I think the fact that it was being centrally managed was just so easy, being a cloud-first platform, meant that my team could just, within the click of a button, update everyone's assets across the network. And I think the fact that we use Adobe Stock for basically our media library, so our imagery, our video stock, and so being able to integrate that into the library and again update that centrally by removing as well as adding assets has been really, really helpful.
Nice. And Richard, you're seeing trends that go beyond the purely photographic, so creative trends that extend beyond kind of that one snapshot. Wondered if you could maybe elaborate on some of that.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, as we mentioned at the start, we've got design trends that we're picking up on. And that's down to the fact that we've got this new selection of softwares in there. Classics like Illustrator, this is something that's been around for quite a period of time, but is the industry standard when you come into illustration and design, so that's great. And that gives us instantly a means of finding out, and seeing how that's being used in the industry. But new things like Dimension, which is one of our softwares that's come in for taking 3D into a 2D world. That's definitely informing both the way people are using, for instance, 3D objects, so that you don't have to just settle with what's in the still and that's it. You can now go in, you can relight something, you can retexture it basically, so that's great. So, this is where we're seeing, with things like the Art Deco update side of things, so that's one of our trends there. That is a case of, we're saying, there's a whole range of the old style Art Deco, which, was obviously of its day, just totally owned the style of design back in the 20s in particular. That's now having that update, it's having that sort of being brought into the 21st century, and therefore, with the treatments that we're seeing artists putting onto that, and also the textures and surfaces that we've got within the 3D stock elements that we've got in Adobe Stock. Basically, that's where we're really seeing that being used and becoming a predominantly new form of art, basically. And similarly, with the semi-surreal, so this is where, we're seeing, again, that combination of 3D and 2D working together, which is great. It certainly gives it that, definitely in this instance, a surreal image, but in the case of some of these, like the image on the top left-hand side here, at first glance you might think that's real, but actually, unless it's a really tall tree or a very cloudy day, then it isn't, basically. So basically, this is where we're getting people to have a second look. So it's actually engaging people, not just with a glance at an advert or a piece of work, etc., etc. It's okay, hang on, I'll think about that because it looks right, but maybe it doesn't, and therefore we're drawing people back in. So it's a very engaging technique that people are using, and this is really being enhanced by this ability to bring in 3D into this 2D environment as well, basically. And then there's some of the standard sort of illustration, just 2D design elements we're seeing with things like the handmade humanism trend. Essentially what we're saying there is, 2D is still there, design and taking it from that flat empty screen or piece of paper, basically. Yeah, that's certainly something which we can all work from, and we've got multiple different tools now, even on laptops and on tablet computers, basically nowadays, that we sort of delivered from Adobe's perspective that allow you to create there. But we're seeing much more of this trend for much more natural-looking art forms, literally hand-drawn. The fact that you can use a tablet now with some of our softwares to actually draw and create, that really is coming through to both the content we see being delivered from our contributors into Adobe Stock, but also what we're seeing in, for instance, Behance and so on, and just generally speaking in campaigns out there. And then, lastly, sort of similar to the joys of the first two there, we're getting this this modernisation of a Gothic theme as well. So we're certainly seeing the more acidic styles, the darker tones and palettes basically coming in with modern Gothic, but also again 3D working its way in there, integrating into the workflow basically. So those are four that we're seeing out there at the moment, and we're saying this year we think are going to be the trends to follow basically, or certainly the trends to be aware of. Now, the question there is whether you follow them or whether you break away from them. That's something to decide basically.
Yeah,
but these are what we're aggregating together so people can instantly go to Adobe Stock and follow into a design trend here basically.
No, definitely. I'm so jealous of some of the talent that was on display there. So Sabrina, some of that modernist revivals of some of the old styles, particularly the Art Deco one, is particularly interesting. Is that sort of an individual creator sparking that, or is that brands consciously emulating and trying to update that old style, do you think?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, certainly at Dentsu we have in-house designers that are constantly kind of making sure they're on the, on trend when it comes to design. But equally, when you do work with freelancers and agencies, you do naturally get more fresh thinking and different perspectives on design trends. But I think what's interesting that I think coming out of the report is this handmade humanism. I think that for me is probably the one that's most visible to me as a big trend as a marketeer. I think it's the democratization of tools that allow for more digital sketching with iPad Pro, with Adobe Fresco. It's just much more common now for designers to be able to incorporate digital sketching. I think illustration is featuring a lot of big brands at the moment. So MailChimp, WeTransfer, Notion, even Coca-Cola's Super Bowl ad in 2019 was essentially an illustrative piece of animation. So I think that it is very, very interesting in terms of seeing that kind of the freshness of handmade craft interacting with purely digital craft. I think with Art Deco, I would see slightly more of a trend towards wholesome design, so incorporating more natural materials, eco-friendly design, more woods, more papers, collages. I think those are definitely becoming more front of mind, and I think that relates to the whole debate about climate change and being eco-friendly now, so I think that is very much going to be reflected in design this year. I think the surreal trend is, to be honest, not new. I think that's something that fashion brands have embraced basically since they've existed, so the likes of Kenzo, Moschino, Gucci, they're very much all about the surreal space. I'm not sure the other verticals have really embraced it yet, but I do think in terms of the sorts of branches of surreal design, you've got the oddly satisfying content, which is huge on Instagram, and there are some brands out there that are being quite clever about embracing that trend. So Van Cleef Arpels, for example, they did an amazing piece of content on Instagram, which basically emulated some of the oddly satisfying videos that you see trending on Instagram. And I think with modern Gothic, again, I would see that sitting more in an experiential space. So I'd see that sitting more kind of restaurants, events. I don't see that a huge amount in terms of marketing content from a purely content perspective, but I think that's certainly kind of popular from an experiential point of view, but I have a feeling that will move on as people start embracing more wholesome design. I think there's a bit of a reaction at the moment to the digital dystopia and the darkness that represents. I think people want brightness now. So, and I think that's something we're definitely seeing at Dentsu.
Yeah, certainly. And James, there seems to be definitely a trend towards merging kind of those real world forms of art with the digital. So what new pieces of technology are you seeing come to the fore, and how far do you think it will go? Will we see, for instance, more done with augmented reality?
Yeah, I mean, just a point on the last question there, actually. I think also to some degree, when you've got young designers coming up that, they're discovering things for the first time, like the resurgence of vinyl, for example, right? They don't know about Art Deco, they're just finding it for the first time. So things like that becomes very exciting for them now, obviously, to take their own spin on it. They'll use elements of it and then obviously elaborate from there. But in terms of technical, yes, we do have we have agencies in our group that specialise in AR and VR, and we're doing some really cutting edge stuff there. So that's absolutely one area of focus for our business. But I think another area where we're seeing increasing demand is around tools like Dimension, so making 3D and 2D composites accessible to everyday designers. I think designers, traditional designers or digital designers, historically have shied away from 3D because of how complex it is and how time-consuming it is to make. I think with tools like Dimension, a use case for us is mocking up product shots or packaging, things like that. Before we would have to create 3D objects from scratch. It takes a long time, complex, requires special skill set. Where now we can use Adobe Stock, we can get bottles, packaging, cartons, all that kind of thing, cereal boxes, and then we can overlay our designs from Photoshop, place it in a scene, light it, render it to 2D. Something that used to take days, even weeks, can be down to a few hours, right? And especially when you're in that prototyping stage, you don't want to spend a week on a design to put it on a packet for your client to say they don't like it, right? So it means we can generate content faster and fail faster and get to the right product. And then in some cases, not just for mock-ups, but actually for final photo shoots, the ability to be able to create a photorealistic 2D composite from a 3D scene means we can do photo shoots a lot faster, lower cost. We can constantly be changing the packaging as it's being manufactured, things like that. But also, as Richard said, combining traditional photo shoots where actually we want to place another object in that scene. Traditionally, you'd have to reshoot the whole thing, get the talent back in, and do it all from scratch. So, yeah, it's just making these tools available and removing, we don't want blockers in the creative workflow to be down to technology. We just want people to be able to create and create what they've got in their mind with as few technical restrictions or blockers as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like the sort of thing that would have been, pie in the sky futurism even a couple of decades ago is now sort of come to the fore and people almost expect it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually talking about that, one of the things that we want to talk about most was these motion trends, because that still to me seems almost impossibly futuristic. I just wondered if you could maybe elaborate on some of how people are using motion to really get across brand messages and actually some of the trends you're seeing around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got, once again, these 4 motion trends, which, in of themselves, as soon as you see something on a TV or on a screen, it's obviously engaging, but as soon as it moves, instantly it captures the eye, doesn't it? So therefore, obviously everybody out there producing a campaign, everybody who's doing anything, nowadays on the internet is going to be making the most of that. So therefore, what we've said is, okay, well, let's have a look at some of the key bits of innovative technology that we've got in here. One of the things that we have within our technology in things like Premiere and in After Effects is the ability to encapsulate some animation, so these sort of flashy things that you're seeing on the screen, basically, and it could be things like title sequences and so on. All these animations basically are what we actually give you the opportunity now with our software to actually produce as a template, basically. So you could reuse it, you can use it again. And then in Adobe Stock, what we've done is we said, okay, well, here's the opportunity to get a whole selection of these that you can use. You don't have to start from a blank screen or a blank sheet of paper, as it were, with your ideas. So that's something that's been part of Adobe Stock since the word go. We call them MOGUTs, or motion graphics templates, basically. And what we've done is we've said, okay, well, we'll take that one step further. So with these ones, these are movement response motion graphics templates. So therefore, you can drop them onto a film and you can adjust them so that they actually follow the motion. So you can see with the boxing gloves there, the way that's following and tracking to the movement, basically. It's powerful stuff. And we're making that very accessible. But even, with all of our templates here, we have templates for Photoshop, Illustrator, or InDesign in Adobe Stock. What we're not trying to do is say, look, there you go, this is how you should do all of your creative work and just copy this. No, we're saying, okay, you can start from ground zero. You can go into Premiere, you can go into After Effects, you can go into Premiere Rush. You can start from there and produce your footage, et cetera, et cetera. But what you can do here is you can say, all right, if I haven't got the time, or if I haven't got a genesis of an idea straight away in my head, take one of these and drop it in and start working from there. And you can edit from there, and you can work from there, basically. Take it into After Effects and properly edit, or just drop it into Premiere and adjust it, or in Premiere Rush, adjust the elements that are adjustable. So that's one of those trends that we're seeing. Our technology is enabling. We're sort of, this wouldn't have been a trend. To your point just now about some of the 3D meeting 2D world, this wasn't available 2 years ago. This is not a decade ago. This is real new technology, basically. Likewise, one of the other trends we're seeing in motion is more, you can see this every day on TV basically. There's various different test cards, et cetera, that pop up that have got this sort of almost mesmerizing motion graphic in here, or basically animation basically in the form of video here. It's just becoming ubiquitous as far as the trend we're seeing this year is concerned. So you're going to see a lot of that. And of course, it wouldn't be talking about video without talking about what's going on in the real world. So therefore, you know, we've got this environmental documentary trend, which basically is us saying, okay, you know, the environment's very important. I had to go through about 2 floods almost to get here today, basically. So it's, you know, it's essentially good that we're surfacing content and saying to people, look, this is, you know, we're trying to support that issue. You've seen it with Glowing Gone, the campaign we supported last year, and we continue to support regarding the coral reefs and the bleaching of the coral reefs, basically, and trying to raise awareness of that. So same thing applies here, but we're doing that within Adobe Stock in particular, calling out this trend and saying, all right, here is some footage, basically, that's going to save you having to send a film crew across the world in planes, et cetera, et cetera. You know, a lot of this stuff is locally produced, basically, so therefore it's saving that, you know, saving the planet, for want of a better description with what we're doing here. But it is intended to also surface that as an issue and give people the opportunity to use that as far as their, you know, the undoubted need in campaigns are concerned. So a whole bunch of different types of, you know, worldwide environmental issues that we're surfacing here as far as this is concerned. And lastly, neon glow. You know, I mean, again, going back to the creative styles of things. You know, this is where, again, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, you know, it's similar to the modern Gothic. We're sort of bringing back again that we're seeing the being brought back the sort of darker pastels and darker shades and so on, but also accentuated with really dynamic lighting and so on. And again, we're saying, okay, this is what we're seeing. Same with all these trends. This is what our analysis is showing. This is what we're seeing as far as what's going on out there, and also what we're predicting. You know, we do. You know, we have the ability to predict what's going on. So that's where we're getting these trends we're seeing coming in, and we're saying to you, okay, here it is. Here's the information. Up to you what you do with it. So there you go.
Yeah, interesting. It's almost like the democratization of those, you know, Hollywood level tech that allow individual creators to really express themselves in a way that wouldn't have been possible even a few years ago, like you said, 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
And going to that sort of the idea of blending still images with motion, I think we can all think of some really good examples. I think we've seen it in out of home. Increasingly we see it, you know, on social platforms as well. So I wonder what you think of some of the trends around that. Whether you think that's going to, you know, accelerate, or we think that's sort of a something that we're going to see really perfected over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think probably a couple of years ago it was all about video. Everyone was just about video, to the point where all the channels were saying they were video first. I think we're now starting to mature a little bit in terms of having a bit more of a balanced view of formats. I think there's a place for still, I think there's a place for imagery, and there's a place for animation, and they all have their own purposes, they all serve their own objectives. But I think what's interesting, certainly coming out of this report, is out of all of these to look out for, movement response, I think, is definitely one to keep an eye out for. I think there's not actually that many brands I see at the moment really embracing this fully yet. I think KFC was probably one of the first to pioneer the idea of movement response in their What the Cluck campaign, which is very much playing with animation layered over video, and I think that was really kind of innovative. I think that is definitely a space that brands can start to look at a little bit more. I think animation just generally, I think, is being used much more by brands. In fact, Great Western Railway released an amazing ad recently, which is purely animation, but it's so magical and, again, quite illustrative in its design. But I think, again, it ties back to that handmade humanism trend that we're seeing as a general visual trend as well. I think there are a couple of trends in here that I would argue are probably a little bit old now. So liquid abstract, neon glow, I think they really kind of peaked a few years ago. And brands started kind of pioneering with that about 5 years ago. So I think we're seeing the sort of catch up right now in terms of people trying to use this to kind of catch up to that trend. But I think certainly from a Dentsu perspective, we're starting to move away from that. I think people are wanting more bright design, more wholesome design, more again, relating to that eco-friendly sort of approach to design, trying to reflect some of that daytime brightness that maybe is a bit of a reaction to this digital dystopia that's been pushed on us so much for the past 5 years or so.
Yeah.
I think also, I think in terms of people like craft, right? People get, I think that, as you said now, with everything being digital, especially in, a lot of these superhero movies, everything's CGI. It doesn't necessarily feel that real or engaging. But to see an ad that may look like it's been hand drawn, or like the Wallace and Gromit film, people know that's taken time and effort to do. Obviously, we know that you can potentially do it digitally, and it can still look like a handmade craft. But I think a lot of people will engage more thinking that's taken a lot of time and effort. It's not just someone that sat on a computer and did it, whether they use a computer or not.
To it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's that recognition that there is investment, even though there is significant investment that goes into the digital forms of it as well. People are happier almost knowing that somebody has sat down and maybe hand-drawn a cell.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I mean, using these digital tools though, there's surely there's an impact on kind of just the tech requirements that go into creating it. So sort of how are you seeing that sort of those tech requirements alter and change, and how is that impacting your own sort of business decisions?
Sure. Well, I mean, we have agencies across Dentsu that are specialists in video and motion graphics, and very heavy users. They have fiber infrastructure. They have media asset management platforms. They're used to dealing with terabytes and terabytes of content. That won't go away. That's very industry standard. But where we're seeing probably the biggest area of growth is in around short form video, micro video, animation, all that kind of stuff, which is being done, by all kinds of different people, from marketing teams, social teams. It's about being able to create engaging content, again, with no barrier to entry. Not everyone always has access to a Premiere Pro editor with that skill set or the budget to do it, but they still need to create video that's, inspiring. I think, when it comes to Adobe Stock, we're very much wanting to work smarter, not harder. So for some things, if we're shooting a TV ad for a client, yes, we will shoot everything from scratch, right from the beginning. But for certain things, whether it's a social campaign, other areas where, you can augment some of your original content with other shots. Why shoot the New York skyline for the millionth time again when there's really high quality stock in Adobe? So it's just knowing where to place some of this stuff, and it's the same with the templates, right? It will give our teams that aren't experts at motion graphics the ability to make that content jump out. And I know, working again with Sabrina's team, we're looking to do that for our own things like title cards and things of our videos, to make sure that actually all they have to do is go in and change the text. They don't need to create a graphics template, and that way it helps again with consistency.
And saving time.
Yeah, and just in terms of other tools like Adobe Rush, that's another key one for us. I have to build videos at work for presentations and things like that. I know how to use Premiere a bit, it's not enough, and it takes me way too long. But I can just jump into Rush, create something very quickly. It looks professional, and away you go. And there's just more and more need for that. I think finally the other area that we're looking to really maximise is offloading a lot of the heavy lifting to cloud rendering services as well. So we don't have to let our computers run overnight while we're rendering out a film or an animation, or have a big render farm in the server room. We can actually offload that to the cloud, get it done in hours rather than overnight, and it means we can deliver content a lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much to take in there, from these creative trends and how people are using them to almost how brands are using tools to streamline their own operations. I wonder, Richard, is there anything that really leapt out to you from any of those answers?
I think looking at the whole trend side of things, it's interesting to hear Sabrina's input as far as what she's seeing emerging and not. And I think we know that we're going by what our stats are telling us and what our research is telling us. But of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that people have to follow all the trends. They can use that as a guideline, basically. And part of what you saw in the video I showed at the start of it was when you were seeing how you could choose undiscovered content. So therefore that thought process needs to go into the way you're working, basically, doesn't it? When you're working creatively, okay, do you want to follow it? But I mean, the good thing is we're telling you what's important here and what we're seeing as being relevant. So certainly if you don't want to try and buck the trend, then you know what to follow now. So it should be at least making it more accessible. I think it's great to hear the ubiquity of some of these tools is releasing that creativity. So, you mentioned Fresco, Sabrina. So basically, Fresco is one of those tools there for illustration on the tablets. Likewise, you mentioned Rush, James. That again, tablet-based or even smartphone-based, editing and creation of content there. Basically, that's really, making it ubiquitous, isn't it? That's really democratizing that ability to do stuff and really getting it out there into the hands of mass populace, basically. But still needs that creative capability in the first place, because to your point, give me a copy of even Rush and it wouldn't be a pretty end result, basically. So it might be easy to use, but you still need to have that capability to look at it creatively. So.
Yeah, certainly. And beyond that as well, you have to sort of know the roadmap for where creative trends are going to go, which is where I suppose the 2020 Trends Report actually comes into play in a big way.
Exactly right, yeah.
So where could people find the Trends Report?
So we'll be sending a link out with this recording, basically. It's on our website as well. And, we can basically drop that onto various different sources. In fact, we'll share it with you guys with Dentsu Aegis as well, basically, so you can actually distribute that yourselves, because I'm sure you'll be wanting to use that internally as well. So.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, we could have gone on for another hour. We could have gone on for another hour about any single one of those trends, really.
Yeah,
but for now, I want to say thank you very much to Sabrina, to James, and to Richard, and to everyone who's watched this special DrumCast in partnership with Adobe Stock. Thank you and goodbye.